Good evening. I am Yvonne Zindel, and I've got the beautiful task tonight to guide you through the discussion Hybrid Future Speculation of Hegard Haug, Jan Kampshoff and Moritz Ahlert. And first of all, I would like to introduce Stefan Brandt. In 2017, he became the director of the Futurium. Okay, also from me, welcome to the second edition of Hybrid Futures at the interface of science and arts. And we're the House of the Futures. So this is only opened some months ago. The Futurium wants to encourage people to address future ideas, future concepts and visions. And under the guiding question of how do we want to live, this is about a joint design of a sustained future. So today's dialogue between scientists and artists on the subject of urban planning of the future. And this is being held in our think space, nature. So here we deal with the issues of how to learn from future in a hopefully more resourceful and sparing life. And a beautiful symbol for this is our large sculpture with the title Neo-Nature, New Nature. And this is what you can see here in the picture. And it represents how we want to learn from nature, derive structures. And in this case, it's bone structures. And how these structures are the model for architecture, and this is how they become it. For instance, with modern ID technology, we derive algorithms, and the next step, we try, based on these algorithms, to then use very few shapes and then build such a complex structure, because this structure actually is composed of more than 2,000 wooden elements, but there's only 11 different shapes. So, besides scientific access, we're interested here also in the artistic perspectives in addressing the new future challenges. And we're convinced of the power of interdisciplinary work, and we believe that dealing with future issues will require the imagination. So that's why we link artistic and scientific ideas in our events, and thus content is not just discussed at a rational level, but also at an emotional level. I'm very happy indeed that today's event is live streamed by Alex TV, and I would also like to thank our partners of the Hybrid Platform of the UDK Berlin and the Technical University of Berlin. And I would like to hand over to Ewelina Dobrzyńska of the Hybrid Platform. So thank you very much, Mr. Brandt. So welcome. I'm Ewelina Dobrzyńska, and I would like to welcome you also on behalf of the Hybrid Platform. So the idea for the project of Hybrid Futures emerged 2 years ago, so it's all the nicer to see you all here, or not to see you, but at least that there is, even in these conditions, adverse events, we were able to come together here. So Hybrid Platform, what do we do? So Hybrid Platform is a project, so a cooperation project between the Technical University of Berlin and the University of the Arts in Berlin, and we've been around for 10 years, and in these two universities, we support the interdisciplinary work, and we do that with different ways. For instance, by supporting lectures and courses, and by supporting interdisciplinary research projects, and but also innovative research labs where different disciplines come together to work, and different methods are applied, and of course also through events like this one that we can see today. Right, and we try to bring together artists, scientists, experts from different fields in order to create a interdisciplinary platform for thinking. And this is what we're doing today as well. We're talking about architecture today, theater and urban studies. And I'm very much looking forward to the insights of tonight. And I would love to pass on to Yvonne Zindel once more, and she's going to guide us through this evening. Thank you very much. Right, so that you know roughly what to expect tonight. First, just briefly, what we're going to do tonight. Our guest is the author and theatre director Helgard Haug, urbanist and architect Jan Kampshoff, and architect Moritz Ahlert are going to introduce themselves to themselves as well as to you, and to give you an insight into their work and also what they're currently addressing and thinking and researching in their various disciplines, what they're interested in especially. In a discussion afterwards, we're going to show concrete projects, and we are speculating about hybrid futures today. We're looking at past and possible future visions, and also the different perspectives of the arts and sciences present today. So we asked our guests to think about the past of their disciplines as well, and also about the increasing hybridization, because after looking in the past and stopping the present time, we then want to start speculation about the future challenges with regard to the respective disciplines of science as well as the city. And in this spirit, I would like to start with Jan, Mr. Kampshoff, and I would ask him to introduce himself briefly. I'd love to. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the invitation of this great building. We visited with students already when it was still empty. Yeah, I'm an architect. I've got a little practice called Modular Beat in Münster, and we founded it already during our university time because the term of architecture was too restricted for us. And from the very beginning, we wanted to link out. We want to branch out into other cultural areas, and we see it as part of the large cultural scene, if you will. So we're interested for the temporary building, whenever there's change, transformation, negotiation, and this developed into a practice. We build temporary projects, but we also create negotiation space or do participation depending on the occasion. So I've got various hats. I'm also university professor at the Technical University of Berlin as a guest professor, and we're going to see that in a minute. We also speculate exactly into these transformation spaces, and we also try to look at the past futures and the new futures. And I'm also in charge of a little initiative called Freihaus Stadt ist, wenn man drüber spricht. So when you talk about the city, there's a different perspective, not just the built-up city, but the city that emerges through the discussion. Thank you very much. I would like to pass on to Helgard. I would like to ask you to introduce yourself briefly. What are you working at the moment? Who are you? What do you do? Hegard Haug is my name. I'm a theatre author and director. I would love to say actually city theatre, but maybe it's a bit confusing because we're not in this Rimini protocol. We don't withdraw into the building of the theatre and don't work in an ensemble, but we work in a free scene in cooperation, time and again, with the city and state theatres and festivals. We do pieces where we try to reflect life's reality and tell this reality, either inviting the people onto the stage. We don't work with actors, but we work with people who are interesting to us through their biographies or their knowledge, and that's why we call them experts. Expert of the everyday life, that's what we call them. But they're not layperson for us because they don't have the trained theatre methods, but they're experts because they come with a plus to the stage. And the formats are very varied. So indeed, on the stage, right into the urban space, and totally invisible too. So we've been doing this for 20 years. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to Moritz. What's your discipline? What's your current issues and who you are and what do you do? Yes, hello. I'm Moritz Ahlert. I'm an architect and I studied at the University of the Arts. And current main task is teaching teaching at the technical university, so I'm linking the two universities at the moment. And last summer, I defended my dissertation, and there I addressed the digitization of the city. And later on, we're going to talk about this in detail, and otherwise, I do different design projects, graphic design, and I'm also interested especially in mapping, cartography, and the translation of urban research into visual language. And yeah, right, at the moment, like the main issue is continuing the dissertation, and I also introduce this into the university. Now, I'm researching together with students also on future subjects and digitization of the city, and there, especially during Corona times, what is relevant is issues of future consumption. How is this going to be designed? How are cities going to be designed in the future? And our changed behavior, and how far does it impact on the city and society? How exciting. Thank you very much to you all. So we advertised this event with a question. We put that in the description of the event. And we were interested in this. How have past life and urban concept impacted us and our environment? So that was one of the initial questions that we asked. And this is a question you're all addressing in various ways in your different disciplines, which you just briefly touched upon. And now I would like to ask you, Helgard, to tell us about a piece that is 100% Berlin Reloaded. That's the title of this piece, and there. I want to hear more about this. You told us Red Day that you work with experts of the everyday life, so these are citizens as well as statisticians, and they deal with numbers, and I think that plays a big role here. Right, it is the last piece that we put on the stage, and also last large events. That was at the beginning of January, so there was a little bit of space until the theatres were actually closed down. But for us, it's the last large event. And then there was also the Jubilee event, if you so will, we had our own birthday, celebrated our own birthday. So there's 100 people on stage, and the 100 people reflect the city of Berlin in this case, and according to 5 criteria that we get from demography and introduced by a statistician. So we look at the age structure of the city, we look at the gender distribution, and where and in which boroughs people live, and what is their marital status and family status, and what's their nationality. And then in a kind of snowball principle, we then implement these numbers. So we've got 52% women and 48% men in Berlin, and there's so and so many women and so and so many men on stage, and we've got so and so many kids under 6 and so many people over 75, and they come to the stage. So that's not very typical piece, because we don't actually rehearse very long with these people. It's more like a play or a game. So based on questions that we ask these 100 people, and we try to actually raise a mirror to the audience, because most of them come from this city, and they have many questions, and we asked 100 model citizens, and we expect these answers, but at the same time, they can ask themselves, what do they think of, I don't know, building up the Tempelhof Field, old airport, or transport policy, very current issues, but also later on in the piece, it becomes more personal, and it's more about the philosophical attitude towards their own lives. And this piece is just rehearsed 4 times. It's like communicating many rules. There's different methods with which the people can give their answers, like going to the one side, expressing it's yes, they're positive. There's also the possibility of more performing elements, and there's also one part that more at the end of the piece with multiple choice, and the participants then will raise colored placards to show their attitude towards this question. So we've got a video that we can watch where we can see how these people react to the questions. So I just want to say reloaded. So if you had this piece of read 12 years ago, is that right? Yes, that's right. 12 years ago we developed it the first time. We started and had a premiere in Berlin and then played it in 38 different cities and developed it further. But we had the feeling that in Berlin, so much has changed, like in the past 12 years. It would be interesting to actually ask the population again, to ask them about the changes, how they feel. Do they feel happy or not? And how much closer is it? Or, how much more hectic or more international, more colorful is the city? And this, on the one hand, we've got statistics. There's 10% more people in Berlin, meanwhile, without a German passport. So they've got a different one to a German passport. But it's also what people feel. That's reflected in the answers. How exciting. So I read the youngest actor was still in the belly the first time round, and then Berlin Reloaded is 12 years old. Yes, we try to get all the former actors, and we try to contact these 100. And again, it shows what has happened in 12 years' time. So people move away, and people have just disappeared, or people have died, and they need nursing care, but there's also beautiful stories like the one who was actually still prenatal, but there was also an infant that was just a few days old, and now as a 12-year-old was on stage and quite alive and proud on the stage. Yes, and plays this piece differently. Great, maybe we can have a look at the little
Entweder oder. Wie hat sich Berlin in den letzten 12 Jahren für euch verändert? Wie groß ist euer Wohnraum pro Kopf?
Wie kann Berlin mehr bezahlbaren Wohnraum schaffen?
Wohin würdet ihr ziehen, wenn ihr Berlin verlassen müsstet?
Wunderschön.
Well, that was wonderful.
Ja, man sieht ja an diesem Beispiel wunderbar.
Right. So you can see with these examples very well why you called yourself a city theatre maker. You're also called documentary theatre, right? So that's a label given to you, and that's because you involve your audience very much, and the hierarchies of the theatre are resolved completely. So the stage here and the audience there, and the audience are not allowed to participate. So I think the last piece you put on stage is, but there's also other examples of pieces where you're not in the classic theater building, but you go out into the cityscape and the public space. Yes, the city is the source of inspiration for very many pieces that we do, but we also want to go into other buildings. But and this was also an answer to the model of city theater. We built a truck, and we said, why can't we use this truck to go through the city? The city is a great stage, and with a frame around it, more or less every crossing turns into an exciting piece. And then we rebuilt a truck, and we had an audience in there, 48 people, very close. They're sitting side by side, and they look through a large window pane on the side of the truck. And they're looking onto the city, and there were several pieces that we did with the City Theatre Mobile, and it started with the biography of Eastern European truck drivers, and we said, we want to actually drive around this course with them, and we want to go to the places that we don't know, where they're loading or unloading, and there's logistics, and there's gigantic halls. And another piece I did together with two colleagues, where it was about the view of the children on their city, and there was different ages. One protagonist was 10, a girl, and the second protagonist, boy, 17, 18, and it was about the rules of the city. How does it work? And who does make the rules? Are they good? Are they too many, too few? Do you want to break the rules all the time? So that depends on the age, of course, as well. The 10-year-old was very, very, very much bent on adhering to the rules, and every red light that was crossed was not tolerable for her, that situation. And the 17-year-old, he just got a totally different attitude to the city, and the lack of freedom that he felt, and also a very limited scope of action that he had. And the third position, and that was the driver himself. And he had come to terms somehow, and he kind of like was conformist, but also muddling through, and he knew all the rules, but he also knew all the exceptions and all the little games that are played, and from these three different perspectives or points of views, we undertook a drive through Berlin, starting with Kreuzberg, and then we went also to the Tempelhofer Feld former airport, and then we came back in a large arch. And then one stop, for instance, was also a very large vacant site where they're building access to the motorway, and the speculation of what could also happen there. Right, the position of the speaker, that's the child on the passenger seat, or what was it? She guides through that piece. Yes, she's sitting up front, and there's a camera, and you can also close the window and also project stuff, but you also connect with audio, but she can also get out, and she did it time and again. There was little interventions, for instance, with the older Jasper protagonist. There was attempts, what's going to happen when you are only slightly off conformity. When you are there and you don't do anything, is non-action already something that might trigger an alarm? And we tried that out in Südkreuz station, where they've got a surveillance system, and indeed they look at these parameters of a person doing nothing, standing in one place for a long time. A danger emanates. This person is then identified, and in this model of surveillance system that was built up, it just means, well, action needs to be taken. So they send out officers because someone's there doing nothing for minutes. And these are the moments that we played with in this piece. Well, let's have a look. Yes, there's a little section that you can see where there's the young protagonist, where we're at that vacant site, and she's thinking about what the future city could be. There.
Okay,
Great.
let's run. Boah, Rudi, gegen dich habe ich keine Chance. Diese Fläche hier könnte man ja eigentlich ganz gut an so ein Unternehmen wie Google oder Microsoft verkaufen. Sie würden hier ein Urban Living Laboratory errichten. Mit selbstfahrenden Autos, Smart Homes, künstlicher Intelligenz und Forschungszentren zur Verlängerung des Lebens. Alles wird dann irgendwie viel effizienter sein und auch nachhaltiger. Alles, also Autos, Kühlschränke oder Lieferdrohnen kommunizieren miteinander. Und wenn du mal nicht zu Hause bist, wird automatisch der Energieverbrauch deiner Wohnung runtergefahren. Wenn Milch im Kühlschrank fehlt, automatisch nachbestellt. Der Lieferroboter, der unter der Erde arbeitet, bringt die Bestellungen dann in die Häuser. Es gibt auch Müllroboter, die sammeln dann die Überreste des Tages auf. Das wird alles zentral gesteuert. Die Stadt wird auch nicht um eine Hauptstraße rumgebaut, sondern um Highspeed-Netzwerke. Man lebt dann quasi in einem Computer. Ein Gigaroboter, ein künstlicher Stadtkörper, in dem die Bewohner als datentransportierende Blutkörperchen immer im Kreis herumgepumpt werden. Google und Microsoft sind auf jeden Fall schon ganz aufgeregt und haben neulich gesagt, hier könnten wir endlich all das tun, was wir tun würden, wenn uns jemand eine ganze Stadt anvertrauen würde. Die Regeln und Gesetze macht dann dieses Unternehmen. Das sind dann Smart Solutions. Die gibt's hier aber nicht, da muss man die Leinwand von selber runterziehen.
You can look at these ancient hills and see nothing. Or you can see nothing to hold you back. No set ways of thinking. No restrictions, no divisions, no excuses. Just endless potential. This is the blank page you need to write humanity's next chapter.
Ja, spannend und vor allen Dingen eine Menge gute Ideen ja eigentlich schon für die Zukunft, beziehungsweise auch ein bisschen gruselige Ideen.
Exciting.
Ja.
And above
Dieser
all,
Text kam dann tatsächlich
quite a
von ihr selbst,
lot
also
of
das
new
war so eine
ideas
Mischung
for the
aus
future and
Innovation
sometimes
und
also a bit creepy.
Ja, nein.
Right.
Also das ist schon
So the
Text,
text
den wir
was
geschrieben
from
haben,
her
wo es
herself,
auch
or was it a
eigentlich
mix
darum
from
ging, wie
discussions?
fremd klingt das aus
Yes and no,
deinem
no.
Mund.
Ja.
It is a text that
Also
we
wenn die
wrote,
begeistert,
and
Smart Solution
this was about how alien it sounds from a child's mouth
Ja,
when
interessant.
she's
Ich musste gerade kurz
enthusiastic
zucken, als die Leute
for the
so ganz
smart
eng
solutions,
zusammensaßen.
etc.
Das wäre heute
Das war
gerade
gemütlich.
Living like a
Ja,
robot.
total.
I just had a
Hat sich
flinch when
schnell
people were
geändert.
sitting very
Ja,
closely
ja, sehr
to
vielen
one another.
Dank.
I was
Ich
comfortable,
komme auf jeden Fall noch
sure.
auf auch ein
Things have
weiteres
changed quickly.
Beispiel zurück, was du
So thank you very
mitgebracht
much.
hast. Aber jetzt würde ich sehr, sehr
We
gerne
will come back
Moritz
to a further example
fragen zu
that you
seiner
also about
Arbeit.
his work.
Ich habe gerade deinen
And
Artikel
I just
gelesen
read
in
your
der
article in the
aktuellen Arch
current
Plus, ich glaub,
Arch
März,
Plus
hier
in
rausgekommen,
March. I
ist
think
richtig?
that's when it came out.
2019.
Yeah, in 2019.
Genau, ja. Und
And
ja, ich war so ein
yeah,
bisschen,
I was a
also ich war
bit
so begeistert
enthusiastic and
über die Dichte an Erkenntnissen, die ich aus dem
about
Artikel gewinnen konnte.
the
Aber auch
insights
so
that I
ein bisschen
could get
erschüttert
from
über
the
die Einsicht, dass
article, but also
du beschreibst, dass
shocked
virtuelle Maps
that you
auch
said
Instrumente
virtual
sozialer
maps could also
Kontrolle
be instruments of
sind.
social
Also da
control.
schreibst du recht
So you
ausführlich darüber, dass wir eigentlich
write
auch
extensively
geleitet
about that,
werden,
that we are
auch
accompanied,
beispielsweise immer,
for
dass es so in
instance,
Computerspielen
in computer
auftaucht, dass wir
games
auf einmal
that
zu einem McDonald's geleitet werden.
happens that
Genau.
you're led to a
Magst du uns
McDonald's,
aus deiner
etc.
Praxis erzählen,
Could you
was
tell
du
us a little
eigentlich
bit
machst
about your
und das an
work
Beispielen
and give us us a few examples.
Sehr gerne. Ich habe
I'd love
4
to.
Beispiele
There's
mitgebracht,
4 examples that
4
I brought
Folien,
along, 4 slides.
die als erstes
First of
ein
all, it's a
Buchprojekt,
book
an dem ich
project
mitgearbeitet
that I
habe
worked
und
on,
unter anderem
and
für
for
die
instance,
Grafik
I was in
verantwortlich
charge of
war
the
und auch
graphics there,
insbesondere,
and above all,
es nennt sich Atlas
it's
für
called
die
Atlas
Karten,
for the
wie
maps.
vorhin schon
As I
erzählt,
said
als
before,
Schnittstelle
so there's
zwischen
an interface
Visualisierung
between
und
visualization
eigener
and your
Forschung.
own urban research.
Und genau, das ist im
And
Rahmen
this
eines
was done
Kunst- und
within the
Kulturprojekts
framework of an
entstanden,
arts
Haus
and
der
culture
Kultur und der
project,
Welt
the Haus der
2011.
Kultur und der Welt in
Und das
2011
war
in Berlin.
auch ein Ergebnis
And
für
this was
mich
also one
aus,
result for me.
so einmal nach dem
It was
Studium und dem
after
Diplom,
university, after my diploma,
erste
it was a
Fokussierung auf das
first
Medium der
focus on the
Karte.
medium of the
Auf
map.
der anderen Seite auch
On the other hand, it was also
ein Schritt
a
Richtung
step in the
Wissenschaft
direction of
und,
science
Publizieren.
and publishing.
Genau. Ich würde gerne
And
das
what
nächste
I'd
Projekt zeigen.
like to do is show you the
Das
next
war-
project
ist
now, and that
eigentlich
is
auch mit einem großen
also
zeitlichen Abstand daraus
with
hervorgegangen.
the
Ein
time
internationales Projekt,
lapse. Now this is
wieder
an
im
international
Kunst- und
project
Kulturbereich.
against
Ein
culture and
Projekt
arts,
im
and a project in
Deutschlandjahr
the Germany year
2016, 17 in Mexiko.
2016-17 in Mexico.
Da war ich auch in
And there,
mehrfacher
I was
Funktion
also
aktiv,
active in
einmal als
several functions as a
Co-Kurator, einmal als,
co-curator and then
Autor
as an
der
author of the
Publikation,
publication,
aber
but
auch
also
als Gestalter
as the
und als
designer
Forscher.
and researcher.
Ich habe das
So,
Buch oder was man jetzt als
well,
aufgeschlagene
what you
Seite
can
sieht,
see as the
das ist
opened
ein
page, this
Atlaswerk,
is an
das,
Atlas
auch mehrere Funktionen
publication
hat.
with several
Einmal,
functions. On the
die
one hand,
Kapitel im
it's the
Buch,
chapters
gegliedert, aber auch die Ausstellung,
in the book is
quasi so
structured,
eine
but also
Art
the exhibition
Metaebene,
is
die
kind of like a
durch die
meta
Ausstellung führt.
level guiding you through the
Genau,
exhibition.
und dort habe ich das
And there,
Thema der Karte
I
fortgeführt.
continued on the subject of the
auf einer
map
reflexiven
on
Ebene,
a
aber auch
reflective
auf einer praktizierenden
level, but
Ebene.
also on a
Das Gleiche habe ich in
practicable
meine
level,
Promotion mit
and I
eingebaut.
also
Ich,
included that in my
letztes Jahr
PhD
zu
of
Ende
last
gebracht habe.
year. I
Nächste
finished it
Folie.
last year, and the next slide, please.
Und genau, du
And
hast den Artikel
you mentioned this
erwähnt, in
article
Arch
in
Plus.
Arch Plus, and
Genau, das war ein
this was
Exzerpt
an
quasi
excerpt
aus
from
einer
a
größeren
larger
Arbeit
work,
und, die bestand aus
and
eigenen
that consisted of my own
praktischen,
practical
Arbeiten, wie
work,
dieses Mexiko
like this
Buch und die
Mexico
Ausstellung,
book and the
aber
exhibition,
auch und anderen kleineren
as well
Projekten,
as
die ich jetzt nicht,
other smaller
zeige,
projects, which I'm not
aber
showing
auch
you now,
einer inhaltlichen,
and also
wissenschaftlichen Auseinandersetzung mit dem
scientific
Thema.
work on the
Und
subject.
das ist einmal
So,
jetzt
on the
Anfang
one
des Jahres
hand,
auch durch die
at the
Presse
beginning of
gegangen,
the
weil
year,
ein
this went through the
Berliner
press because a
Künstler,
Berlin
Simon
artist,
Weckert,
Simon Weckert,
der mit 99
and
Smartphones
he
durch Berlin gelaufen ist
went
und,
through Berlin with
Google Maps
99
gehackt hat,
smartphones and hacked
und
Google
für einen
Maps,
virtuellen
and
Stau,
he
gesorgt
created
hat,
a
den es
virtual
eigentlich auf der
traffic
Straße gar nicht
jam,
gibt.
which there wasn't actually
Der
in the
hatte
street,
zur
in reality.
Erklärung
So the
als
explanation,
Künstlertext
so
hatte er einen Auszug
artistic text, he
meines
had an excerpt
Texts aus der Arch
of
Plus
my
in einer englischen
article in Arch
Version,
Plus in the English version,
genommen und den haben dann
and
Journalisten. Inzwischen ist
journalists.
das Video
So
von
meanwhile,
ihm,
this video has
er hat es bei
been,
YouTube
so he
hochgeladen, 3 Millionen
uploaded
Mal
it
geklickt
in
und
YouTube,
er hat
and
eine
it was
immens,
clicked 3 million times, and
Reichweite
he's got an immense
gehabt.
reach
Das
with
war
it.
zum Geburtstag
So the
15 Jahre Google
birthday
Maps.
of 15 years of Google Maps,
Und,
he
das habe ich vergessen zu erwähnen, in meiner
established this.
Dissertation habe
And
ich
in
mich
my
vor allem,
PhD,
auf
I
den
dealt especially with
Google-Kartendienst fokussiert
Google
und da
Maps
überlegt, welchen
and
Einfluss
thought
hat das
about the
eigentlich auf Stadt und
influence
Gesellschaft.
on the city and
Diesen
society.
Text hat er mit
So he
eingebaut und,
included my
das
text,
hat,
and
er hat mich selber
so
in diesen
in other words, he
Medien-Tsunami
introduced me into this
reingeholt.
media tsunami,
Und das Video lohnt es sich
and this
anzuschauen.
video is well worth watching.
Und
And
diese grundlegenden
so the
Thematiken
fundamental
von
subject
Digitalisierung
of
und Stadt,
digitization
die
and
auch
the city, like
bei Helgard in dem
Helgard
letzten Video schon angesprochen
also
haben,
mentioned in the
wer
last
bestimmt eigentlich
video.
unsere Städte, wie werden sie
So
sich in
who
Zukunft
determines
gestalten,
the cities, and how are they going to
verändert,
be designed in the
verändern
future?
digitale
How
Tools,
do digital
die
tools
Stadt.
change the
Da
city?
habe ich mich
So
insbesondere in meiner
in
Dissertation
my
auf
PhD, I
kartenbasierte,
concentrated on map-based
Dienste
services,
wie Uber,
like
Airbnb,
Uber, Airbnb, or Deliveroo,
in Berlin
and
auch nicht mehr
at
gibt.
least in Berlin we don't have that anymore.
Die kann nur funktionieren
So
aufgrund der
this can only
Karte
work
und aufgrund
based on the
der
maps and
location-basierten
due to the location-based
Services,
services
die verknüpft
that
sind.
are linked.
Und das Gleiche,
And the same
genau,
Oh, let's have a look at the next slide. And I also address this in my teaching. I also looked at the different studies as experimental theory seminars. I'm looking for these subjects and these contents with my students. I want to re-explore them and readdress them. So this is an Instagram picture of the current digital semester at the Technical University of Berlin, where I've been working since 2017, on the one hand teaching as well as researching these subjects. So thank you very much. Yes, I've got two more questions to ask you. You described and you also showed that your work also is cartography and graphic design. So you're actually a hybrid too between a scientist and an artist. Could you say that? Well, I studied at the HFWK and did my PhD there, and in Hamburg. It was a practice-based PhD. So in other words, it's both were the subjects that I dealt with in the past years, and I tried to include that frequently also in artistic or cultural contexts, to bring it all together. Do you believe that your scientific discipline has maybe changed towards more of a hybrid, so arts and architecture and urban studies over the past 10 to 15 years? I think architecture as well as cartography, so at the interface between science and arts and design and shape and emotions, and on the other hand also calculations, planability and doability. Yeah, there was in the 70s and 80s, and maybe even earlier, there were great examples. Ray Charles Eames, on the one hand, they did architecture, and on the other hand, they did some research and also translated this into artistic formats. Or in the 90s and the 2000s, and I was characterized by this as well. Rim Koolhaas, the Dutch school, and they tried to expand the term of architecture, and they had cartography included, and so not just the pure grid facade made them stop, but they expanded this and thought about architecture and society at large, and economic and ecological and social factors. All of this was brought together. So it is this exact interface where I operate. And I think this is actually something that determined my discipline for the past 10 or 15 years. Thank you for the exciting insights. I still have some follow-up questions, but we still have time. I would like to turn to Jan. So in your work, you want to turn the urban space into a media communication space, and that's what you write, and I think it fits well as a description, and you also use the term curating. I know that's from the arts, so there's objects of art that are old or maybe existing on Red Day, and then to compile them into something new and get something new like an exhibition out of this, but you're actually using this for architecture and designing in space. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about this, how you understand this term, curating? Or maybe also to pick up on your work, it's about mediation, isn't it, at the end of the day? So we've got transformation processes in society, in the city. The city is complex. And we're looking for formats, how this complexity and the challenges of change can be communicated and mediated. And you're doing a great job. You go through the city, and actually every citizen of this city should have the possibility of adopting this perspective. And you use this tool of cartography and so making data visible. And pretty early on, we asked ourselves, how can architecture itself become part of this type of mediation and curating? So the art has actually grabbed, but Curara, looking after and building and planting, comes from dealing with existing and then set it in a new relationship with one another. So that term is very important for us because we assume that a lot is there already, and that it's about dealing with the existing, and the curating is rather looking after this and finding new links and recombining things as well. That's how we understand this term of curating. And I use the term, so it's overused a little bit because, but it still works quite well for architects, and actually it can mean anything and everything. And but we advocate a changed perspective in architecture and also in the discipline of architecture, going away of tabula rasa and new building. I mean, this is still what many universities teach, just new building, and what we're trying, and we're talking about climate crisis, etc. We have to adopt a new perspective. And I've got two examples that I brought along and that show what we mean when we talk about what it means, what does architecture means, that mediates and that looks at futures or past futures. So maybe the first picture, so this is in Bochum, doesn't look like Bochum. Could have been in Chile. This is just a vacant site of this company, and we were asked by an institution to do research in Bochum, and we went around the boundaries of Bochum. It's the Ruhr area, the region which was determined by labor, and now is also a metropolis where the boundaries of the city are disappearing. So this is, again, on the subject of cartography and mapping. So we went around the boundaries of Bochum and found wonderful spaces that are not determined by labor because nothing's happening there. And then we had texts about doing nothing and idleness. And, Böll, the writer, also, and the morals of the work and so on. And then we connected with these spaces. And then something happened which we couldn't guess, and Opel shut down its large plant, and then we went to the Schauspielhaus, the theater. They initiated a festival, a future festival. They asked, what can the city be when the labor goes? And there, at a place in ThyssenKrupp, vacant site, and we thought it was beautiful, we had a little acupuncture that we positioned there. And this is the tower made of shaft elements that actually go down into this earth. We made a tower out of it. So maybe next slide, and this is not it. There you go. This is it. So we've got this collective idea of employers, and we set a speculation of future, of an individual future, where there's more or less no work anymore, where you look at the free time and your own body, and this also looks like a body, doesn't it? That you just climb into this, and this is a sauna for one person, and you buy, or you are gifted some time to spend in this building and think about a possible future. And yeah, so this goes into two directions, right? Because the self-determination means freedom, but it's also a big burden because you have to think about your own life. And the architecture does exactly that. So you don't know whether it's the biggest privilege to climb into this thing, or whether you are in a prison. So this is, of course, perfect isolation architecture, mind you. So you don't know whether you're imprisoned or whether there's something very special going on there. Next picture, please. And here you've got the little sauna box, and you can have a sauna there. And the time, and this we heard that from very many guests, is very intense. And you ask this question, what could a future of the city without labor be? And at the same time, when we remember the first picture, I don't want to go back. How do we deal with this residual space? Do we have to redesign them, or maybe a little acupuncture is enough to give them a new code? So, and the project was called the One-Man Sauna Doing Nothing in Bochum. That was the title. Next picture. Now, right, and now we're jumping into the past, and this is a work that we did with students at the Technical University of Berlin, and we then implemented on site. And there, we are in a city is called the new city of Wulfen, northern Ruhr area, an utopia of a city with great experiments of residential housing, and in part they pulled it down again. There was an 8-story block here, residential block, which they pulled down again. So next picture, and you can see the grey building in the background. It's the Finnstadt in Wulfen, and there was many innovative experiments there. For instance, the Meta City. This is frames and structures to build the city, and this is a growing city system. And that's interesting subjects, and totally forgotten and totally failed, unfortunately. But we tried to build a pavilion. It's got a roof, but actually you're still going to get wet because the roof is too high. But it's just a neuralgic place. This is an offer to meet, and we said goodbye utopia, back into the city of the future, and we tried to communicate with the citizens there and also with the animals, as you can see. So why don't we learn from utopia, which we've already had, which we knew, and which have meanwhile been forgotten more or less. So whenever something fails, people forget about it and don't speak about it. But there's a lot of positive things that you can see here. And the next picture, please. Yeah, right. And you can see this in operation, the Finnstadt, the building in the background, it's the neighborhood, but also we had the neighbors and externals to come, and we talked about brutalism. We talked about contemporary residential typology that's being discussed, like cooperatives and cluster living, etc. Nothing new. I mean, cluster living, not, but a lot of these subjects had already been on the agenda there, and we tried to do a revision of this city. And the great thing about this is that due to the discussion, there's also an esteem for this utopia, and the citizens, they were very grateful, and they were positive too. And we spent 1 week there with a discussion. We had great evenings, and we said, okay, we're going to go away again. So it is also kind of like a scene setting, and the architecture that we can see there is like wooden structures that tries to pick up on the aesthetics of the framework modules and small structures, and then you find the small structures and large structures again, and then also to be a kind of mediating project. So these are just two insights where we believe that through architectural objects and negotiating space, as we call it, to find an entry into discussion and also the information from this complex system of the city. Beautiful examples, and you always refer back also to the past. So you said, what did you call it? The past futures. Yes, I love that, past futures. Right, so your discipline thrives on change too, doesn't it? So could you spontaneously review the past 10 years of the discipline? What are the greatest change engines in the past? So just a few words for the past 10 years. I think there's such a lot happening at the moment, and we're speculating also from this Corona period, so we're showing that change is possible. So in the past years, so we've had the digitization, but we also know that we have to deal with our resources totally differently. We have to deal with the existing stock totally differently. So it's very complex. We don't have the situation where we can just plan a certain district and then they're implemented. That's great. But for us as architects, this means that we have to, of course, we're the building experts and we know all the standards, etc. But we also have to be mediators. We have to be communicators and also the negotiators of space. And so these new fields of action are opening up, and sure, the architectural profession as such is complex as such. If you think of the so-called services and look at the services from A to Z, no one architect can do that, but the discipline as such will be much more open, much more communicative, and will address these large, complex subjects in a different way. And that's great. And we see that in teaching. The technical university is super. We've got Eike Rosford, we've got the Natural Building Lab, and this is about this, how in the future can we build large buildings that handle resources differently. And the Habitat unit is great with participation and complex systems. And we try also with the students to do little acupunctures. And this just shows a little range of what is happening in the system, and also anchored. I mean, the boundaries are flowing, aren't they? I forgot to say that on interdisciplinary activities, we had an author too, and she comes from the Lisa Deinulert from the theatre. She just used the early history of the city, and then she created a feature, and the students spoke it, and this was to be heard in the pavilion during the day. So I've got goosebumps when I think of it. So these are great moments. So you just said Corona, for instance, is also an engine. So we've got a little bit of a collage that we've brought along. Maybe we can see it. Thank you very much. So because here what we can see, there's a crisis, and the crisis always a motive for innovation. Maybe it's a bit positivist. I mean, virus also cause a lot of damage, but pandemics always change cities a lot, be it like the first sewage system of the city of London was created due to cholera. One of the cholera waves was driven by the cholera waves, and by the yellow fever, it only actually became clear that you have to implement a waste collection system and so on. So pandemics actually brought cities forward extremely. And we've got a little collage that we brought along on the impressions from the last few weeks. What do you think, from your discipline or your background, from your expertise, and how do you see the city currently? So when we've got emptiness and distance, is there also potential for your work? Maybe you want to start, Helgard. Right. So first of all, the crisis has also got an acceleration function. Suddenly, things are possible that were in backlog and were not followed up with such energy. And in the theatre, everyone started with a streaming, with a theatre festival, for instance. They wanted to show peace of mind, but this was all digital or virtual. And but I must say, I personally am not such a fan of that, and so I think it's not good enough. And so I believe that museums, concerts, and theatres, and so the cultural institutions could be much more innovative and could be more courageous. So this was just a very hasty closure, and that could have been done differently. You could handle new conditions. For instance, you could have the theatre open the whole day and have individual viewers come in, and so all kinds of things, like you have the spectators come to the stage, and the actors on the audience area. So it's all very extremely variable. So it's good that you become aware of this a little bit. So how tightly are we usually sitting, or how do we deal normally with one another? It's different, and you have to see, is this right somehow? And does it correspond with what is being recommended? So I think you could be much more playful in the formats that develop. So many years ago, we did a piece in a call center, for instance. There's a protagonist, or there was several call center protagonists, but they had an individual spectator on the line by telephone, and so one-on-one. So that was a dialogue piece. And so we're picking up on that as well now, and to see if we cannot use this situation newly, and to see what is happening in India at the moment. So that's a totally different situation, Corona in India or Calcutta. and the people there. And so that's a very dense metropolis of millions. And also now they've had a storm as well, and the internet broke down. So then to create new formats out of this. Still, I must say that as innovative as the concepts are, I'm still a fan of the shared experience coming together in one room and also negotiating. Like you gave that example, you have a roof somewhere and you come together and you negotiate subjects and you meet people and you meet people in your diversity and also in a variety of opinions. And so maybe it's also a danger in the individualization, so that we are setting up shop in our individual sofas, in our individual living rooms. So I didn't want to be impolite, but I picked up the phone because we've actually got viewers and questions, and there's a lot of them. So we've got extremely high number of questions. But before I will ask a question of the viewers, so we want to maybe see a piece of the Calcutta, the piece, the old piece. We've got enough time to do that? Okay. Let's have a look at that. So I just want to say that this is Calcutta in a box, and we can see a scene where the cameras are open already. So we did this when Skype was relatively new, and it was extremely exciting for us that you can speak with one another and you can actually see one another across such a distance between Berlin and India. And there's a moment late in the piece, at the beginning, there's telephone and only the voice and the intimacy of the voice. And so it was that was the stage. The telephone line was the stage first. And at some point, the camera just opens up and first with a person in the theater, spectator, and later in the call center, and then to open up the view of reality of this workplace. So nowadays you speak of Zoom fatigue because we're hanging out in meetings. So how many years later is this? For the very first time, we started out in 2004. Skype was really the last, the hottest shit. And this is 2008, so this was already a further development. Great. So let's have a look at it.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Now you enter the stage.
Hi.
Hi. Hello. You see me?
Yes, I see
With all my 25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very good.
You know what? Now you know me, but you need to know my office space around here. Because I know your office space, you don't know my office space. Yes. So I will show you my office space.
So now I lift the camera, and now you will see rows of people. Can you see it?
Am I speaking to Mrs. Lois Gregson?
And these people here, they are making sale in Australia. Yeah, they're selling mobile phones to Australia.
And you sell some mobiles too?
We also sell mobiles to Australia, and there are many other different appliances which we sell, but predominantly they're mobile phones.
They're making what you call outbound calls.
Call back which
It's when you call up and try to sell something.
How many persons do you call in Nigeria?
And they pretend that they are all Australians. They used fake names, used fake accent, and they said that they're calling from Australia, but they're actually making the calls right from India.
No transfer till now.
And this is the window which I showed you actually.
Yes.
I showed you on the first floor, just behind the window is the place where I sit. Yeah, here. She's goddess Kali, who's actually in a very, very angry mood. Do you see it? She has one of her tongue outside.
So that was beautiful. And you can see 12 years ago, so there were actually these moments also that we've got today. I mean, technology is maybe new, but the problems are the same and maybe have amplified, especially with megacities like Calcutta or Bangalore. And you notice it also with the effects of the crisis extremely. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to pick up the phone to see what you're being asked. One question to all. So on the background of the exceptional situation now is social distancing a chance for new format and new architecture. So for instance, we saw that the city, buildings and balconies became stages. So that is an exciting question. So indeed, that is what happened, isn't it? That people sang from their balconies and clapped from the balconies, and then that was criticized, and then there was messages that were conveyed, and from the digital to the analog and back. So is there potential for design? I don't know whether one can transfer this directly. What we notice now, especially with the young students in the second semester, that the situation in isolation and that the public space suddenly is something that you perceive differently will lead to a certain level of awareness and esteem of things that we actually accept as every day. So I've got 2 or 3 pictures that I brought along that we could maybe show, and so I just downloaded stuff from the server. Right. What we did was the students in the first year, we asked, where are you at this point in time? And there was astonishing pictures like here. Somebody rearranged the room 9 times, and then you saw an interim space between balcony and the window, and then aligning it differently. And then there was a short text describing the life situation, and we noticed they're very awake, very sensitive, and they notice what it means to live in such isolation. And maybe the next picture too. Yeah, right. And we had them draw it very precisely. So it's also like a living and sociological study. We've got 80 different portraits of living space that, and maybe in the next step, the next picture, please. Yeah. So, and also looking at what is public space, or formerly known as public space. So you can see perspectives that the students have done, where they have the distance that they make visible. And we take this as an inspiration, and you can see this in the next picture. These are first speculative structures that try to create a free space and also common space in a more abstract or graphic study, and there's a collage of individual rooms. They're trying to take this as a trigger. So I don't know whether you turn balconies into stages, but I understand that you cannot build flats without a balcony anymore. We understand that the allocation of certain functions like bedroom, kitchen, etc., we need to think that more flexibly, and we understand maybe also that you can't build office buildings anymore that are only useful as office buildings. So we have to have this, we have to negotiate life newly. We have to become more flexible, and then we have to have different use phases in the spaces, and still not go wide and suddenly we need 90 square meters per person, because that again is a problem that will hit us on an ecological side. So there's a lot of potential there with regard to flexibility, and yeah, so that continues, and we just notice that all are digitized, and then we suddenly talk about countryside and city, and you like to do theater and coordinating, like with Zoom meetings, and not the city anymore. And when we look at the big picture of the growth region and shrinking region, or the countryside and urban spaces, you just have to think these relationships newly. Of course, we're learning a lot at the moment, and we just have to develop and design the new future properly. Right, I think, but you also have to remain awake and alert. I mean, looking at your research, you looked at the maps and data, and so for you, this must be an incredibly exciting moment when the data of many mobile users was made available to see how other people moving around in the lockdown or briefly before that. So the visualization, how people move around in the urban space and open space. And have you got an idea idea of what might be the next research project, or is this not a current issue for you at the moment? Yes, it is a very relevant subject indeed, and what people deal with a lot, and especially from an urban perspective, it's very exciting, and at the same time, you have to remain critical and of what is happening now. Things are being implemented that years ago might not have been possible otherwise, and so it's exciting also to have a look at this, how international it is and how people address it differently across the world, like in China, South Korea, or other places. And these apps are very promising in solving the problem, but my concern as a critical scientist is that there's new problems that might arise. So what could that be? Well, the loss of private sphere and, yeah, for instance. Sure. I would like to ask another brief question. So there were so many questions directly to you, and wait a minute, I just have to call them up again. So, how can one transform the city as a citizen? A question. So maybe with the help of data, with the help of tools. I think that's where the question is going. Yes, digitization offers new chances of participation, and I'm very interested in that in my research, dealing with applications and digital tools. But on the other hand, also in the physical projects, and so with examples like Jan showed us, where there's people who build together, and not just students for people, but the best would be people from the neighborhood with a common goal, maybe to create something together. And architecture offers a lot of potential to create something together. In times of Corona, this is being called into question, of course, because the arts and culture project and the social and activist architectural and urbanistic projects are suffering from this distance. Yes, unfortunately, see how long it will continue. I've got a request. So we are talking about speculations today, as the title says, between arts and science. And I'd like you to choose an envelope, because we want to do a little numbers game with you and looking into the future of your respective disciplines and the future of city. And here we've got 3 years, and one of these years I would like you to pull out and to see what we're going to talk about.
Oh, das wäre auch schön.
So it's 2107.
Okay, also wir reisen ein
so
bisschen
we're
zurück in die Gegenwart.
Traveling not into the past but into the future. Right, so what do you think? What is going to happen this year? Are there going to be stages? Are there new buildings? Is Google Maps still going to be around? Is that a question to me? Well, a question to you all. So my speculation would be that on the one hand, the digital and virtual and the real and physical will merge and come together more and more. Maybe there's no separation anymore, and but hybrid and being in between and overlaid, that's going to be the new normal. And in the hope, of course, that with the new possibilities, that you can achieve something positive. So, and I'm repeating myself, but also with the goal in this city to do more together, to create more sustainability, more social and cultural achievements, and maybe so far. Exciting. Well, that would be good. It's a nice future. Hegard, are there going to be stages? Sure. So the stages are going to survive the next 100 years. And Asia, for instance, there's new stages being built. And so the backlog of building projects we don't find other in other continents, especially for stages. I did a piece in the National Theatre of Wales. That was a theatre without a certain building, but I thought that was pretty promising, the most promising project for the future. So this is a national theatre, but they design their program that they're mobile. And there's different places, different partnerships, and this might be a theatre, but it doesn't need to be a theatre. It can be a barn, for instance. And I think that is sensible. So it's not that you cling to a certain building or a certain ensemble or rigid structures and that are also expensive, I suppose. Right, they become expensive very fast, and they're also very slow you down very quickly. They slow you down. And I think this is what I would wish for, that that you lift this without losing the status. That's why I thought the model was brilliant, to say that, well, this is the National Theatre, but at the same time, so to go to the National Theatre, we don't have to go through the doors and spend time in the lobby, etc., and drop into the plush seats. No, we can also experience it differently. How? Well, do you want to hear my vision? Yes, your vision. Well, time and again, the communication structures that you've got in the theatre and the arts and in architecture should be taken seriously. Who is actually talking to whom, and who is actually negotiating what kind of subjects, and what are we going to do with the result? So it's not like so that the text is not just thrown at the fourth wall, but it's more permeable. So what about the digital, like with Moritz, that there's something hybrid? I suppose that's going to be used more, yes. So that the theatres should record the plays. I mean, that's a super finding. I mean, you want to record it, and maybe you also want to change them, and not just conserve them, but maybe also to keep them open, so audiences are not here, but you've got formats like that you share that more and you distribute it more. Right, what's the most humane city in 2107 that you could imagine yourself in? Well, that's extremely difficult to project so much in the future. And I mean, as someone who's 100 years old, how did you speculate then? We don't have that experience, but I'll say it differently. So I hope that, I don't know, what was it? 2107. So 2007, that we will look back and you can say, well, in the 20s of the last century, we got the move. So we understood that the globalization is something that is not endless, and that we have to handle resources differently. That we have to think of the common good and what makes up our world, and we have to think differently about that and find different ways. Because at the moment, with just continuing the same old, I mean, we're going to run into great conflicts with a world population that is not going to fit the planet anymore if the human beings are going to treat the planet as they're doing it at the moment. So we've got resources that will be used up completely by that time. And I hope that we will look back and say, like the 20s and 30s, which we're experiencing at the moment, was the time where we managed to turn around. And so that in the city, it's got economic consequences, and I mentioned the common good already, but also something with a different idea of growth, maybe. And at the end of the day, architecture, very material, very concrete, a different way of handling resources, and also with systems that should be able to adapt to certain needs and not highly specialized or highly technical with double glass facades, etc. No, but something that works simply, which you can maybe also take apart again. And yeah, so that's my hope. And then I think 2107 has got a chance also of a good life. Otherwise, we're going to get it wrong in the next 20, 30 years. So it might be the case that the city might not play such a big role anymore, because city, they say, is the greatest engine for the economy, for innovation, for innovative people meeting there, for various groups of people meeting there. And when city loses in significance, possibly, so what happens then? So this might happen too, like Paris saying, well, we want to have a city, a 15-minute city where you can reach everything in 15 minutes. So little neighborhoods, little villages within the city, possibly. This might be different engines from innovation. There's critical researchers who say we want to go away from the research, like the GDP, which is pushing us more and more, just making more and more money. Possibly you could think city totally new, and maybe like, I don't know, little villages that form communities or tribes, to use a digital term. Well, I don't know. So there's many discussions, I think, that are a bit misleading. I think this tiny house movement is totally absurd, because then they should go to IKEA or whatever, but this won't work because there's not a model. So this is a dropout model. I think the city as such is, I don't want to talk about efficiency, but so it's a densification of living together, which we can organize well, and I think which still has a lot of room. And when we think about the infrastructure we might not need anymore, like roads, we'll need roads less, then there's space, there's room. And I think that's a 15-minute city, so if we use the existing good infrastructure and develop that and use it better, then that is going to be a step in the right direction. And that's what I was talking about just a little while ago, to use what is there already. And so now I've got some more viewer questions. We're engulfed with all these questions. If I may, I'll ask you some more, and that is to Moritz. What is smart about smart cities? How can a city be smart regardless of how smart their citizens are? That's a nice question, isn't it? So the city is an agent. Well, smart, we discussed smart already, and we heard it from the little girl, didn't we? How smart it is. So you can also look at it critically. It's a marketing term for certain futures that people are pushing, and efficiency plays a big role. And the question is, efficient for what? And I've got the feeling that in the smart cities, very often, the human being is forgotten in the importance and the central role, what the city is there for, actually, in the first place. And often, in smart cities, so when you look at examples, often there's a technical focus, so it's the belief in technical progress. I mean, that rings familiar. I mean, I wasn't born in the 50s or 60s. People bet on the automobile and certain separation of functions, etc. So that was based on that grid and that pattern, without remembering what the natural needs of people are. So this is repeated a little bit, that the technical development is just increasing its importance over and above the human needs that you do also do stuff like you don't need, like with Jan. You do nothing, and, or you don't spend all the time on the internet or the smartphone or work or whatever. Sometimes it's also doing nothing, and then it might not be very smart, mind you, but in my vision of a city, this would actually include smartness, so non-efficient things. Good. A city of idleness, or where it is possible, yeah. So, and not to be observed or monitored, like in Südkreuz station, and you identified as a danger. Yeah, and you're allowed to just stand still and maybe even just lie down and have a snooze. That would be good. That's a nice city, isn't it? Indeed, I've read in The Guardian that many cities like Bangalore, so megacities, just are not designed to meet the needs of their citizens, really. And in the corona crisis, this just becomes more extreme. It's just like a magnifying glass, and people don't really have the necessary infrastructure to survive, and they're imprisoned in these cities and cannot get out. Right, I've got another few questions. So what city concept do you think is the pandemic friendliest? Are there cities in this situation have got certain preventative measures and have addressed the pandemic better than others? Or I would like to add, so what about future concepts? So how could one imagine cities that would include that? I mean, there's not going to be the last pandemic ever, and we've got other large crises ahead, like climate change and the breakdown of economies. And so how can you build cities that are really smart and cleverer? Have you got good examples of cities that work well already? Well, I don't have a clue, I must say. It's whether the cities that due to their specific layout, or, that in the current situation they've got certain advantages. So because it has much to do so with the fact of what conventions, what rules govern our living together. So I think that the places of community and meeting are maybe designed differently in the future and have to be designed differently. So we thought of, I spoke of the cluster living, where in a larger community, and people live together in a larger community, and you say maybe that's not the core family, and the couple or the single, but you live together with, I don't know, up to 20 people in a household, and this is then a structure of self-organization, and that might offer certain advantages. I don't know, like child care, for instance, and also sharing rooms and more generations under one roof. So those are things that no doubt, I mean, they're important anyway, because we're living in a situation where the classic image of the family that we're building with man, woman, 2 kids, and the students talk of nuclear living. So kind of, but that's not everyday life anymore. It's become much more complex, and there's patchwork, singles, and distance, and so all of that goes in the heads in the direction that living will have to be newly thought. And I think Corona does play a role, and that adds an additional aspect. So maybe this aspect of flexibility, and but how this impacts the city and the infrastructure in concrete terms. I mean, we're experiencing that the public transport, for instance, is not existent anymore because it becomes dangerous, and that's a catastrophe. Probably have to also rethink public transport. It cannot lead to the situation that everyone uses their cars. And the cycling path. Yeah, the cycling path is an aspect that is very important, I think. And I think for Berlin, they've decided that there's certain routes, cycling routes, that have been set up spontaneously, and they're going to remain. And we noticed in this situation that things become possible with this thrust that you wouldn't have thought and imagined possible before. So this is maybe also this awareness, this sensitivity. So these are good examples. Right, have you got an example for an extreme pandemic-friendly city that works well and continues to work well? So it can be in the past, for instance. I don't know, like the water pumps in London. Well, my current feeling is, unfortunately, that it's more like that's the enemy picture. So suburbia, so single-family homes, this sprawl, this housing sprawl and urban sprawl will win over, and rather this tight and dense concept's going to lose. But on the other hand, you can see in Berlin that the significance of open space, and maybe it's a fortunate situation that it's spring, and there's special time anywhere in the roads and the public space, that free spaces are regarded differently. And there's also burdening factors like the automobile. And, when you think of the cycling routes and whatever they're discussing, that car parking is going to be then transformed to gastro and catering zones, and that the outside space becomes much more important. And that's the case also in the history. When you look at the people's parks in Berlin, they were developed from a hygiene point of view, saying that per inhabitant there's so and so many square meters of green that are necessary. And these are the same rules they're still using today to develop urban space. And I think to strike a healthy balance there between dense building and outside space, and high quality outside space, and a healthy climate which is not alien to people, that's the future. And I believe that a lot is good in Berlin, and but that's not the reason why the pandemic actually bypassed Berlin to quite an extent. So we've got 5 minutes left, and I asked you beforehand to also think about questions you'd asked of one another. Have you brought something along? Questions for one another? So I've got 2 questions to you. So one just brief one. So this truck, I mean, that's what I asked myself. This truck with the seating, and how do you get an approval for that, a license of it? Maybe you can tell me that afterwards. So what is this? Is this a fairground ride? Is it a bus, or what is it? I don't know. But the actual question I want to ask is, how do you regard your role, also differentiating yourself from urban planning and urban participation, from maybe thinking from a planning point of view? And so, are you seeking the proximity, or are you distancing yourself? I mean, what you're doing is very important in communicating future. Right. So you could take pieces of ours to take tools for urban planning, but that's not my concern. So, it wouldn't be wrong, but it's not my expertise, right? So I can observe, so I can uncover things, I can offer things, I can contrast things, and I can make them identifiable and recognizable. So rarely projects have led to a concrete implementation, so that you say, oh, that's right, the Hermannplatz looks awful. We only need to do this, that, and the next. But with a truck, we just went to Hermannplatz and said, aha, so this is how this square works. So this is square, we observe, and then we look at the extraordinary rules that actually what may be done there and what may not be done there, and how it mixes, and how from a large sense of security in this truck being unrecognized. Well, like Jimek, the animal researcher. No, that would be mean. This, and so we want to show empathy, so that I actually identify what am I. I am part of this. So it's not a slum tour or a zoo tour when I can look at elephants, for instance. No. There's a very emotional recognition. So that's also the case in this tour. So that people are very much on board emotionally, and it makes you sad and angry and funny, whatever. But you're in this security behind this window pane, and you're looking like through a magnifying glass of what we share. Well, according to my understanding of the discipline is where we, as architects and planners, should come to that and understanding what is there. Right. So as a tool, you can do that, use that, sure. So time and again, we've had people in the truck at the beginning, and we also looked at the squares through their expert eyes. There were urban planners, there were psychologists, there were lawyers. And say, what do you see when you look at this? And that also was integrated into the piece, but we don't change the place, right? Your view might actually change your perception, will change the way you perceive the square when you walk across it the next time round. And it's, you don't forget this. But we don't change the square. So like, oh, you have to just put up this, put up that, or whatever, and there's a much greater square. No, this is something that I would leave to other people. Thank you. So have you got a question to Moritz? Yes. I wanted to ask Moritz if he could not enrich Google Maps with a new application. So what do you think is missing? Or what could you maybe take to an extreme with a new feature or improve with a new feature? Well, very simple answers. Privacy button or function. Good and interesting possibilities that such a map-based app offers, but the user should have the possibility to control for themselves what will happen with their data that are the consequence of the interaction with the map. Well, we've got 1 minute left, just 1 minute. Have you got a fast question to Jan that he can answer quickly within 1 minute? Just a word? No. Well, so that has already emerged in his examples of how he presented himself here. So my question was a little provocative, and whether he regards himself as a classic architect. Sure, the new classic architect, mind you. So that's really interesting, and I think it's. I think, of course, I influence the discipline and the teaching to communicate this new understanding. So I wouldn't say, no, I'm not an architect anymore. Sure, I am an architect. I'm the new classic architect. What a beautiful ending. So I had so many good questions from our viewers, the audience, the invisible audience. So what are the elements of urban planning will make us become creative? People gave the example like parks or motorway. I love that question, but unfortunately we have to say goodbye. And I wanted to thank you very much. It was a great discussion, and I learned a lot tonight. And I would like to wish you and the invisible audience have a good evening, and see you next time at the Hybrid Talk. Thank you very much.